outside of your institution so that you didn't have to go through the overhead of maintaining it. And I'm not necessarily talking about the entire ERP. I'm talking about parts of it, pieces that that may require a lot of overhead from you to maintain. What if, for those commodity services, what if we moved some of those things to the cloud and made them available on demand so that upgrades are out of sight to you and out of mind and out of your management infrastructure, and instead somebody else worried about that, and all you did is point your instance out to the cloud and you're able to take advantage of functionality. So we're already starting to do this today. We're starting to offer up optionally, because you can always still download these components and maintain them yourselves, but certain components we're making available in the cloud. What does that mean? It simply means that rather than maintaining that piece of software on site, you're merely just pointing your instance to the cloud. And then from that point forward, someone else is worrying about upgrading it and maintaining it. So we're starting to do that. That's one example of a mechanism in which components can be delivered earlier, better, quicker, cheaper, and again, without having to wait for major dot releases. You can take advantage of anything that's in the cloud, in the SunGard cloud, right away. Here's an example of one. So we actually can listen and respond when we have evolution and when we have the cloud and these other mechanisms componentized. We can listen and respond. I call it sense and respond. We can sense the need in working with you in the outside-in fashion, and we can respond quicker. So here's an example of that. In 2010, one of the myriad of needs that has arisen globally is because of a lot of part-time instructors, an increase. We're seeing an increase globally, especially in the US, but also globally, an increase in the number of adjunct professors and part-time instructors, and the need that we heard from the industry was, there's a lot of overhead relative to maintaining the various contracts that this rise in adjunct professors is actually causing. So what we were able to do very quickly is create a module. We call it the Faculty Compensation Tracker. This module was able to be developed very, very quickly. It is made available in the cloud, so it's a component that you don't have to download and install software for. And we were able to do it relatively quickly because there's no software to distribute. It's in the cloud. It's a component. It's made without dependencies on the usual suspects. So it doesn't require a major upgrade in order to take advantage of and consume it. So I share this example with you merely to highlight that even not just existing components can we move to the cloud, but we can take new functionality that we sense and respond to using our outside-in methodologies and the new mechanics that we are in transition with, and taking advantage of those mechanics and able to deliver solutions to you quicker. We've also been talking to you about something we call Project Horizon, which is our internal project name for the effort of modernizing our user interface across all of our products. And this new user interface we call Aurora, and it spans across everything that we do, not just Banner, but all of the components that add on to Banner, as well as all of our product set, all of our assets. We'll take advantage of Aurora. This too is a fantastic example of evolution, because we're not going to go and do this work and then wait for several years before you can actually take advantage of it. In fact, as you take advantage of it in components and parts and pieces along the way, you actually don't have to go through major painful upgrades to get there. Earlier when I described evolution, I mentioned we've separated infrastructure from application code, etc. That's very important for something like this, because this is a major piece of work. This is a very large change for the ERP. So how do we do this in an evolutionary fashion? Well, we give you the infrastructure, something called a database update utility. You'll hear about that later today, which is a component, an ability to upgrade the infrastructure, the database, without touching or affecting in any way the functionality of the application. But what it does is it prepares your infrastructure to be able to receive application components with the new Aurora interface. And it's fantastic. It gives you a lightweight manner in which taking advantage of new modern technologies is simpler, lighter weight, and easier and much lower cost than we have ever done, or any IT vendor has ever been able to do in the past. So it's quite fantastic. And the new UI, I won't get into it here, but it is a very rich, consistent interface across all the products that we offer, and it's incredibly modern. So a Web 2.0 richness for the user, and everything is RESTful services. You're able to connect and extend and do things in a very modern fashion. Another example of the Open Digital Campus I'd like to share with you is something we call Infinity. Some of you may have heard of Infinity. Infinity is a stack of tools that we have made available to our entire customer base without having to charge an additional fee. This is anyone who is an existing SunGard Higher Education customer has access to this entire suite of tools. So I'd like to describe this to you, but first I'll tell you why we're doing it. One of the core promises of the Open Digital Campus was to help you and really enable you to take advantage and maximize your current investments. Do more with what you already have. And that, in fact, is what Infinity does. So Infinity is a set of tools. Well, what does it do? Let me talk about the 4 parts of Infinity briefly and what is available, because not all of these tools apply to everyone. And I'll share some examples. So the first part of this Infinity stack is something we call on the top left-hand side there called the Infinity Application Framework. This is source code. This is infrastructure code that we actually use internally to develop products. For example, the faculty compensation module that I mentioned earlier leverages the Infinity Application Framework. There, pretty much any new component that you see from SunGard will utilize this. What is it? Well, it's basically, if you sit down and write an application from scratch, you have to do a lot of work before you even get to the first line of functional code. Well, the Infinity Application Framework is all of that stuff that you have to do before you write that first line of functional code. So the benefit is it allows you to focus on that functional code and not worry about all the infrastructure. That's what it is. It's all the stuff that connects to the enterprise and makes everything flow and work nicely. And we use it internally. Why do we make that available? And again, this is not for everyone, but for those that are interested in essentially working with the same software stack that we use, perhaps in order to extend something or to write your own applications. It could have nothing to do with SunGard Higher Education software. So we make that available, we make that open. We also make it open so that we can collaborate with you. There are some institutions that take this and collaborate with us on how to even make that better. And I'll talk about that in a little bit relative to our community source initiative. The second component I have up there called the SaaS platform, I've already talked about this actually. This is our cloud service. This is where we take components, move them into the cloud, and make them available on demand. So we're doing that today. The one below that, called Infinity Infrastructure, is the cloud made available to institutions to build their own private cloud. So if there's an institution here that's interested in building a private cloud, we actually have some automation, some infrastructure that you might want to leverage and take a look at. It's essentially our cloud made available to you on site. Now finally, the last component, I'll spend some time on this, called the Infinity Process Platform, is a software tool. It's a business process management tool that allows you to view and leverage components that you already have in your infrastructure, software that you've already invested in and installed, that perhaps you can derive even more value from. How does it work? Well, there's nothing like concrete examples, so I'll share a few examples. In the United States, in the state of Texas, there are 40 institutions that took the Infinity Process Platform last year and used it to accommodate a need from the state of Texas, the regulatory body that governs state institutions in that particular location of the world. And the state had mandated a certain governance model and requirements around the electronic movement of high school transcripts into the institutions, into the student information systems of these 40 state-funded institutions. And of course, like most regulations from government, it had a lot of requirements and a lot of specification around what format the data needed to be in and how it moved and how it's authenticated and all of that. Now, historically, we had one method at our disposal in order to accommodate requests like this, which was to build a modification, a custom piece of code that would accommodate this requirement. And of course, that would have taken, X amount of time to do and Y amount of dollars, etc. Instead, we decided to leverage the Infinity Process Platform. What this allowed us to do is leverage existing functionality that these institutions had installed. It allowed us to model graphically and conceptualize how the flow of data would occur, how things would come together, how the ultimate solution would work, and to simulate that. And with the Infinity Process Platform, we're able to do that in a matter of a day or two, actually show how this would actually work, model that. The nice thing about business process management is once you model something, you're very, very, very close to the actual delivery of the solution. In particular, if you have installed assets that can actually perform certain functions. Now, as it turns out, in a practical sense, in the reality, you end up with, in any given model, most of the times you end up with some holes, some pieces that have to still be written. But what this allows you to do is to focus on just the pieces that need to be written, need to be accommodated, versus the whole thing. So you leverage everything that you possibly can leverage that exists, and then what's left over, which may be a few components, you can focus and write those components, and then you have a complete solution. The end result is that you do less work. That's the end. That's what you get out of true business process management, is that rather than writing an entire modification, which would be custom from start to finish, you can actually leverage what exists and just focus on what doesn't, and then put the whole model together, and then it runs. Here's a couple more examples. An institution in Mexico also used the Infinity Process Platform to accommodate a need relative to electronic receipts. And I'll show an example of this in a minute. Another institution is in sort of a proof of concept phase of building